Today I'm going to talk about the importance of executive function skills to America's present and to America's future. I will be defining what executive function skills mean. That can sound like a mouthful, but they are really very critical to both our present and our future. There have been an increasing number of influential calls for America to wake up to the importance of executive function skills. For example, to address the high school graduation rate. America stands 21st among 28 industrialized countries in our graduation rate, which is a subject of deep concern to all of us. Recently, Cecilia Rouse, who was a part of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors and is a professor at Princeton University, was asked on PBS's Need to Know what she would do to address this big problem of America's high school graduation rate. And she talked about the importance of executive functions. She said that when you talk to employers, they mention the fact that most young people are not prepared for the workforce. They don't have the skills that they need, and she ties that to executive function skills. Not only are executive function skills important for the high school graduation rate, but they're also important for college graduation rate. There is a 2012 study that was conducted by Megan McClellan, and she's from Oregon State University, and a group of colleagues. They've followed children from 4 years old to 25 years old, and they found that one aspect of executive function, which they call attention span persistence, that means that kids can focus, pay attention, stick with something, and if it gets hard, they can continue to work on it. They found that that was absolutely critical, in fact, more critical than children's competence in literacy and math in their college graduation rate. For those people who are into statistics, they are really dramatic. This study found that for those children at 4 who had one standard deviation higher than other children, were 48.7% more likely to graduate from college. Executive function skills are also very important for younger children in terms of their school readiness and school success. Writing recently in Science magazine, Jack Shonkoff of Harvard University wrote, executive function skills are very important in children's competency in school readiness and school success. In fact, he says that teachers often say that these are more important than the typical things that we think of, like being able to do numbers and letters. At Harvard, Jack Shonkoff and a group of researchers as a part of the Harvard Center for the Developing Child also wrote that executive function skills are the building blocks, and that's an important word, the building blocks, the foundation for competence in social, emotional, and cognitive skills in the future. I've spent 11 years on a similar journey. I didn't start out to write a book called Mind in the Making. I didn't start out to look at executive function skills. I was concerned through a study that we were doing at the Families and Work Institute on youth that far too many children had dropped out of learning. Not just dropped out of school, but had dropped out of learning. That picture that you're looking at is in fact the back of my desk, the books that I've piled on the back of the desk. And that's only a fraction of the more than 1,000 studies that I've read thus far to really try to understand how we can keep that fire, that passion that children have for learning alive in them. And that has been the question that has fueled my last 11 years. At the Families and Work Institute, we've done a series of studies of employers beginning in 1998, and the latest one is in 2012. That's the bright one to the right. And in those studies, we ask employers what they think the critical skills that young people need for the 21st century. And we also ask them what the gaps are in new entrants to the workforce. And what employers talk about is two problems. One is they say that new employees have a fill-in-the-bubble mentality. They think that knowledge is the answer to a multiple choice question. But if you think about the life we lead today, that's really not true. We have to deal with problems that we never knew existed in the past. Think of how we've dealt with the hurricanes that have most recently hit, or the oil spill, or the tragedies in Japan. The knowledge that we need isn't just one preordained answer to a question. It really requires thinking outside of the box, and employers are concerned that young people don't have that. They are also concerned that young people don't know how to work in teams. We promote kids competing against each other, one-upping each other. And in fact, employers recognize that young people have to work in teams in order to succeed. Employers are, in fact, even using measures of that as a way of picking employees. In one company in Michigan, they bring in people who are going to compete for a job, and they ask them, their job is to work on a task with another person, and they pick the person who can make the team person, the other person they're working with, look good, rather than make themselves look good at the expense of the other person. In addition to the problems that I've talked about, the problems with the high school graduation rate, with the college graduation rate, with a lack of readiness for school success, not having the kind of skills that we need for the 21st century, I think there's a larger problem, which is a dropout of learning problem. I've seen this in my studies. Other people have seen it in their studies. Too many young people see learning as primarily extrinsic. They see it as being able to help them get a job, be able to buy stuff, not be a bum on the street or flipping burgers, or the way the kids talk about it. And those are important. Those are very important. Kids do need to get jobs. They need to be able to support themselves and do well in that respect. But they also need to see learning as something that fuels them. They need to keep that passion for learning alive, because in the 21st century, we're going to need people who are ongoing learners. So what are executive function skills? Researchers call executive function skills like the neuronal white space. It's where you bring everything together in pursuit of a goal. Or Jack Shonkoff and his colleagues call it the air traffic control system of the brain, where all the systems are working together toward a successful outcome. Executive function skills involve four things. They involve focus, the ability to pay attention. They involve working memory, which is being able to remember more things than one and keep those things in our minds as we go about our tasks. They involve cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to shift as the demands of the world require us to shift. And they require what is called inhibitory control, which means that you can't go on automatic. You have to do what you need to do in order to achieve a goal. As children grow older, executive function skills involve much more. They involve planning, they involve evaluating, and analyzing, and those kinds of higher order skills that are so important to learning. And now what I'd like to do is to show you a video that summarizes what I've been talking about in terms of executive function skills.
Executive function is one of these broad umbrella concepts because it's defined behaviorally in terms of what it is that people do.
What number comes after the number 10?
It requires being able to keep information on mind.
11.
Being able to remember the particular context, being able to think flexibly, and it requires being able to inhibit a tendency to do what one has done before.
Executive functions are what you need when you have to concentrate, when things are difficult, when things are unusual, when things are changing. If you look at what predicts how well children will do later in school, more and more evidence is showing that executive functions actually predict success better than IQ tests. Typical traditional IQ tests measure what's called crystallized intelligence, which is mostly your recall of what you've already learned. What Executive functions tap is your ability to use what you already know, to be creative with it, to problem solve with it.
Is it gonna go down?
So it's very related to fluid intelligence, because that requires reasoning and using information.
If you ask teachers what it is that they think is the most important determinant of whether or not children are going to perform well in the context of their classroom, they talk about children's ability to pay attention and to control their behavior, all the kinds of things that executive function, in terms of this deliberate, goal-directed problem solving, is important for.
Executive functions involve the prefrontal cortex of the brain and several other brain regions that work in concert with the prefrontal cortex to make executive functions possible. This part of the brain is one of the last to develop, so executive functions emerge during the preschool years and into adulthood. They include a number of key aspects.
There's working memory, which is holding information in mind and working with it.
How many?
10.
10.
Cognitive flexibility, being able to think about something in a new light.
There's no more T there. He's replaced it with a H. Tell us the new word.
Ha.
Inhibitory control. So you want to inhibit distraction. There's also inhibition at the level of behavior.
No one in the house but. No one in the house but me, I know.
Where you want to resist doing what might be your first impulse, but would not be the most appropriate or the best thing to do in that moment.
Simon says, put your finger on your nose.
Because inhibitory control and the other executive functions are so critical to learning, researchers are looking at ways to help children improve them. And while executive functions emerge on a developmental timetable in children, their use must be promoted. In this example of promoting executive functions in a developmentally appropriate way, Adele Diamond of the University of British Columbia shows a child a picture of the sun and asks him to say night when he sees it. This task is used to assess executive functions. When she shows him a picture of the moon, he should say day or morning.
What do you say when you see this?
Day.
Yes. And what do you say when you see this?
Night.
Yes.
Day.
The little boy is going on automatic and making mistakes.
Morning. Night.
He was rushing himself.
Morning.
He wasn't taking the time he needed.
Morning.
But giving him time to stop and think helps.
So what I did was to sing this little ditty. Think about the answer, don't tell me. You might think that it's interference, but instead it gives him the time to figure out the answer. Now can you tell me? What do you say?
Morning.
Think about the answer, don't tell me now.
Night.
Now let's test your executive function skills. I've talked about them for a while. Let's test them in you. Take your right foot and start turning it clockwise. Go around and around and around and around. Okay, you've got that going. Keep it going. Turn your right foot clockwise. Okay, while your foot is going clockwise, now take your right hand at the same time and draw a number 6. Not so easy, is it? Probably a lot of you had your foot start to turn in the other direction. You could learn to do that. It's like learning a complicated dance step. But it just gives you an example of a very simple thing that you can do to promote executive function skills. You had to be able to pay attention. You had to remember the rules that I told you, and there was more than one rule. You had to be able to shift in response to my shifting the directions. And you couldn't go on automatic. And that's what most of us did. But we could learn to do that. Now, as I've talked around the country about executive function skills, I get asked a number of questions. The first is, don't we really need to focus on content? And I feel that the answer to that is yes, of course children need content. But executive function skills are the how of learning. Content is the what of learning. Executive function skills are the how of learning, and we absolutely need both. In fact, I feel that the current emphasis in this country on literacy, on numeracy, on the STEM sciences will not yield the results that we hope that they'll yield unless we have a parallel focus on executive function skills. Another question that I get asked often is, don't families and teachers have enough to do? To add this, oh my gosh, we're already so busy and overwhelmed by everything we have to do. How can we add one more thing? And my view about that is that these are everyday things, just like the game I gave you, that we can do to promote children's executive function skills. It's not adding new things. It's doing some of the same things in new ways. In fact, there are 4 things that are really important about executive function skills. Every child can learn them. Any adult can promote them. It doesn't take expensive equipment or fancy toys, as you saw in the video that I just showed you. And it's never too late. And that's really an important thing. We will increasingly be talking about executive function skills in young people, not just young children, and we'll be talking about them in adults, and we'll be talking about their importance as this country ages, because executive function skills can help us age well. Another question that I get asked is, aren't these inborn? Can you really promote these skills? And yes, you can. In fact, the studies that Megan McClellan and other people have done have shown that when children made gains on executive function skills, it improved their math and literacy over time. So yes, these can definitely be promoted. Executive function skills underlie the 7 life skills that I found in the research that I did, filming close to 100 researchers on how children learn across the academic disciplines, and reading those more than 1,000 studies that you saw on the back of my desk. And here are the skills that I think are most important. Focus and self-control. You can't go on automatic. You have to pay attention, and you have to have the self-control to do what you need to do in order to achieve your goals. The second one that is really important is perspective taking. Some people think of perspective taking like empathy, being able to understand other people, or emotional intelligence. But it's really more than that. Perspective taking means that you can understand, and it's a cognitive appraisal that you're doing, you can understand what other people think and feel. Perspective taking is really the skill that Peter Drucker calls essential to the success of business. If you can understand what your customers need and want, you're much more likely to create successful new businesses. Communicating, and communicating again is more than literacy. Communicating is knowing what you want to communicate, being clear about what it is you want to say, and then understanding how your message will be received. Making connections is the 4th life skill that is important. Making connections is symbolic representation. It's the stand for relationship. It's knowing that letters stand for sounds and that make up words. It's knowing that numbers stand for objects. It's a part of every single discipline in the world, part of our knowledge in every fundamental way. And making unusual connections is the basis of creativity. Critical thinking, there has been some argument about critical thinking lately in the press, but critical thinking is the search for valid and reliable information in order to guide our behavior. And that, of course, is fundamental to leading the kind of life that we want to lead. Taking on challenges is the 6th skill I found is important. It's more than coping with stress. It's being able to take on that next hard problem. And in a world where knowledge is constantly changing, in a world that is unpredictable, in a world where change is probably our only constant, being able to tackle that next tough thing is really important. It's like being able to get back on the bike when you've fallen off when you're a kid. And the last skill sums it up. It's being a self-directed, engaged learner. It's being an ongoing, lifelong learner. And there's 7 principles that promote that, as you will see in the book, Mind in the Making. I hope that this taste of life skills has whetted your appetite to learn more about how executive function skills are critical to helping your children and my children thrive, both now and in the future. Thank you very much.